Welcome to German History with a German accent. My name is Wolf, W-O-L-F, just like the animal, and in this video I'm speaking about the Red Baron. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel. Manfred Albrecht Freiherr von Richthofen was born in Kleinburg near Breslau on May 2nd, 1892, into a prominent Prussian aristocratic family. His father was Major Albrecht Philipp Karl Julius Freiherr von Richthofen, and his mother was Kunigunde von Schickfuss und Neudorf. He had an elder sister, Ilse, and two younger brothers. As a child, he enjoyed riding horses and hunting, as well as gymnastics at school. He excelled at parallel bars and won a number of awards at school. He and his brothers, Lothar and Balko, hunted wild boar, elk, birds, and deer. After being educated at home, he attended a school at Schweidnitz before beginning military training when he was 11. After completing cadet training in 1911, he joined an Uhlan cavalry unit, the 1st Emperor Alexander III of Russia Uhlan Regiment, 1st West Prussian, and was assigned to the regiment's No. 3 Squadron. When World War I began, Richthofen served as a cavalry reconnaissance officer in both the Eastern and Western fronts, seeing action in Russia, France, and Belgium. With the advent of trench warfare, which made traditional cavalry operations outdated and inefficient, Richthofen's regiment was dismounted, serving as dispatch runners and field telephone operators. Disappointed and bored at not being able to directly participate in combat, the last straw for Richthofen was an order to transfer to the Army's supply branch. His interest in the air service had been aroused by his examination of German military aircraft behind the lines, and he applied for a transfer to the Imperial German Air Service. His request was granted, and Manfred joined the flying service at the end of May 1915. From June to August 1915, Richthofen served as an observer on reconnaissance missions over the Eastern Front with the No. 69 Flying Squadron. In August 1915, he was transferred to a flying unit in Ostend, a coastal city in Belgium. There he flew with a friend and fellow pilot, Georg Zeumer, who would later teach him to fly solo. On being transferred to the Champagne front, he is believed to have shot down an attacking French Farman aircraft with his observer's machine gun in a tense battle over French lines. He was not credited with the kill, since it fell behind Allied lines and therefore could not be confirmed. Manfred von Richthofen had a chance meeting with German ace fighter pilot Oswald Boelcke, which led him to enter training as a pilot in October 1915. In February 1916, Manfred convinced his brother Lothar to transfer to the Air Force services. The following month, Manfred joined No. 2 Bomber Squadron, flying a two-seater Albatros C-3. Initially, von Richthofen appeared to be a below-average pilot. He struggled to control his aircraft, and he crashed during his first flight at the controls. Despite this poor start, he rapidly became attuned to his aircraft. He was over Verdun on April 26, 1916, and fired on a French Nieuport, shooting it down over Fort Douaumont, although he received no official credit for it. A week later, he decided to ignore more experienced pilots' advice against flying through a thunderstorm. He later noted that he had been lucky to get through the weather, and vowed never again to fly in such conditions unless ordered to do so. Manfred von Richthofen met Oswald Boelcke again in August 1916 after another spell flying two-seaters on the Eastern Front. Boelcke was visiting the East in search of candidates for his newly formed squadron, and he selected Richthofen to join this unit, one of the first German fighter squadrons. Balke was killed during a mid-air collision with a friendly aircraft on October 28, 1916, and Manfred von Richthofen witnessed this event. Von Richthofen scored his first confirmed victory when he engaged Tom Rees on September 17, 1916. His autobiography states, "I honored the fallen enemy by placing a stone on his beautiful grave." He contacted a jeweler in Berlin and ordered a silver cup engraved with the date and a type of enemy aircraft. He continued to celebrate each of his victories in the same manner until he had 60 cups, by which time the dwindling supply of silver in blockaded Germany meant that silver cups could no longer be supplied. Richthofen discontinued his orders at this stage rather than accept cups made from base metal. His brother Lothar, 40 air victories, used risky, aggressive tactics, but Manfred observed a set of maxims known as Dictator Balke to assure success for both the squadron and its pilots. He was not a spectacular or aerobatic pilot like his brother or Werner was. However, he was a noted tactician and squadron leader and a fine marksman. Typically, he would dive from above to attack with the advantage of the sun behind him, with other pilots of his squadron covering his rear and flanks. On November 23, 1916, Manfred von Richthofen shot down his most famous adversary, British ace Major Leno Hawker, described by Richthofen as the British Balke. The victory came while Richthofen was flying an Albatros D-2 and Hawker was flying the older DH-2. After a long dogfight, Hawker was shot in the back of the head as he attempted to escape back to his own lines. After this combat, Richthofen was convinced that he needed a fighter aircraft which is more agility, even with a loss of speed. He switched to the Albatros D-3 in January 1917, scoring 2 victories before suffering an in-flight crack in the spar of the aircraft's lower wing on January 24th, and he reverted to the Albatros D-2 or Halberstadt D-2 for the next 5 weeks. Richthofen was flying his Halberstadt on March 6th when his aircraft was shot through the fuel tank, quite possibly by Edwin Benbow, who was credited with a victory from this fight. Richthofen was able to force land without his aircraft catching on fire on this occasion. He then scored a victory in the Albatros D-2 on March 9, 1917, but his Albatros D-3 was grounded for the rest of the month, so he switched again to the Halberstadt D-2. He returned to his Albatros D-3 on April 2, 1917, and scored 22 victories in it before switching to the Albatros D-5 in late June. Richthofen flew the celebrated Fokker Dr. 1 triplane from late July 1917, the distinctive 3-winged aircraft which he is most commonly associated, although he did not use this type exclusively until after it was reissued with strengthened wings in November. Only 19 of his 80 kills were made in this type of aircraft, despite the popular link between von Richthofen and the Fokker Dr. 1. It was his Albatros D-3, serial number 789/16, that was first painted bright red in late January 1917, and in which he first earned his name and reputation. Manfred von Richthofen received the Pour le Mérite in January 1917 after his 16th confirmed kill, the highest military honor in Germany at this time. The same month, he assumed command of Jasta 11, which ultimately included some of the elite German pilots, many of whom he trained himself, and several of whom later became leaders of their own squadrons. Ernst Udet belonged to Richthofen's group and later became Colonel General Udet. When Lothar joined, the German High Command appreciated the propaganda value of the two Richthofens fighting together to defeat the enemy in the air. Richthofen took the flamboyant step of having his Albatros painted red when he became a squadron commander. His autobiography states, For whatever reason, one fine day I came up on the idea of having my crate painted glaring red. The result was that absolutely everyone could not help but notice my red bird. In fact, my opponents also seemed to be not entirely unaware of it. Other members of Yasta 11 also started painting parts of their aircraft red. Their official reasons seem to have been to make their leader less conspicuous, to avoid having him singled out in a fight. In practice, red coloration became a unit identification. Other units soon adopted their own squadron colors, and decoration of fighters became general throughout the Imperial Air Forces. The German High Command permitted this practice in spite of obvious drawbacks from the point of view of intelligence, and German propaganda made much of it by referring to Manfred von Richthofen as the Red Fighter Pilot. Richthofen led his new unit to unparalleled success, peaking during the bloody April 1917. In that month alone, he shot down 22 British aircraft, including 4 in a single day, raising his official tally to 52. By June, he had become the commander of the first new larger fighter wing formations. These were highly mobile, combined tactical units that could move at a short notice to different parts of the front as required. Richthofen's new command, Jagdgeschwader 1, was composed of fighter squadrons number 4, 6, 10, and 11. Jagdgeschwader 1 became widely known as the Flying Circus, due to the unit's brightly colored aircraft and its mobility, including the use of tents, trains, and caravans were appropriate. Richthofen was a brilliant tactician building on Boelke's tactics. Unlike Boelke, however, he led by example and force of will rather than by inspiration. He was often described as distant, unemotional, and rather humorless. He was cordial to officers and enlisted men alike. Indeed, he urged his pilots to remain on good terms with the mechanics who maintained their aircraft. He taught his pilots the basic rule, which he wanted them to fight by. Aim for the man and don't miss him. If you're fighting a two-seater, get the observer first. Until you have silenced the gun, don't bother about the pilot. Manfred von Richthofen sustained a serious head wound on July 6, 1917, during combat near Werwijk in Belgium, causing instant disorientation and temporary partial blindness. He regained his vision in time to ease the aircraft out of a spin and execute a forced landing in a field in friendly territory. The injury required multiple operations to remove bone splinters from the impacted area. The Red Baron returned to active service against doctor's orders on July 25th, but went on convalescent leave from September 5th to October 23rd. His wound is thought to have caused lasting damage. He later often suffered from post-flight nausea and headaches, as well as a change in temperament. Manfred von Richthofen received a fatal wound just after 11 a.m. on April 21, 1918, while flying near the Somme River. At the time, he had been pursuing, at very low altitude, a sub with Camel piloted by novice Canadian pilot Lieutenant Wilfried Wap May. May had just fired on the Red Baron's cousin, Lieutenant Wolfram von Richthofen. On seeing his cousin being attacked, Manfred flew to his rescue and fired on May, causing him to pull away. Richthofen pursued May across the Somme. The Baron was spotted and briefly attacked by a Camel piloted by May's school friend and flight commander, Canadian Captain Arthur Roy Brown. Brown had to dive steeply at very high speed to intervene, and then had to climb steeply to avoid hitting the ground. Richthofen turned to avoid his attack and then resumed his pursuit of May. It was almost certainly during this final stage in his pursuit of May that a single bullet hit Richthofen through the chest, severely damaging his heart and lungs. It would have killed Richthofen in less than a minute. His aircraft stalled and went into a steep dive in a field on a hill near the Bray-Corbie Road, just north of the village of Vaux-sur-Somme, in a sector defended by the Australian Imperial Forces. The aircraft bounced heavily, and the undercarriage collapsed, and a fuel tank was smashed, before the aircraft skidded to a stop. Several witnesses, including gunner George Ridgway, reached the crashed plane and found Richthofen already dead, and his face slammed into butts of his machine guns. Number 3 Squadron, Australian Flying Corps, was the nearest Allied air unit and assumed responsibility for the Baron's remains. His Fokker Doctor 1, serial number 425/17, was soon taken apart by souvenir hunters. Major Blake, who was responsible for Richthofen's body, regarded the Red Baron with great respect, and he organized a full military funeral to be conducted by the personnel of the Number 3 Squadron Australian Flying Corps.